Section 1. The Burning Tank. July 11, 1944, 06:42 hours, outside Saint-Lô, Normandy. The hedgerow explodes before the sound arrives. A flash, a crack like the sky tearing open. Then the Sherman lurches sideways, its left track screaming as metal teeth shred into the dirt. Inside the turret, the air turns white-hot in less than a heartbeat. Private Eddie Mallory does not scream at first. He cannot. The oxygen is already gone. The German 75 round has punched clean through the side armor and into the fighting compartment. It does not need to explode. It only needs to touch the stacked ammunition lining the hull. That is enough. Flames climb faster than thought. The interior paint bubbles. A radio wire snaps like a fuse. "Bail out, bail out," someone shouts, but the words are swallowed by the roar. This is what the crews call it, not officially, not in any manual. They call it the Ronson effect. Lights on the first strike. Mallory fumbles for the hatch latch with fingers that no longer feel real. Somewhere behind him, someone is pounding on steel. Somewhere below him, something is burning that should never have been allowed to burn. Outside, infantrymen flatten themselves into the mud. They have seen this too many times. A Sherman takes a hit. There is a pause. Then the tank becomes a torch. 30 seconds, sometimes less. And in that instant, all the training, all the doctrine, all the steel and horsepower and logistics, they mean nothing. Only survival does. 2,000 miles away, in a converted warehouse outside Detroit, a man stares at a charred piece of steel laid across a workbench. It smells like burned oil and death. Clarence Johnson does not speak for a long time. The piece of armor came from Normandy, cut from the side of a destroyed M4 Sherman, mailed back with a report. Another crew lost. Another tank that burned from the inside out. Johnson rubs his thumb across the jagged entry hole. The metal is curled inward like a peeled fruit. Clean penetration, efficient, deadly. He knows the numbers. Everyone knows the numbers. Sherman armor, reliable against shrapnel, weak against German anti-tank guns. Ammunition storage, vulnerable, exposed, packed too tightly. Survivability rate after penetration, catastrophic. But numbers do not smell like this. Numbers do not carry the memory of burned canvas and melted wiring. Johnson is not a general. He is not a colonel. He does not sit in Washington. He does not brief Congress. He does not give speeches. He is an engineer, a mechanic by instinct, a farm boy by origin. He grew up fixing broken things because there was no one else to fix them. Tractors that refused to start, water pumps that seized in winter, a combine that had to run because the harvest could not wait. You learned fast, or you watched your family lose everything. That mindset never left him. If something fails, you do not write a report. You change the thing. A clipboard lies beside him. On it, a typed line from Ordnance Command. Losses remain within acceptable operational parameters. Johnson exhales slowly through his nose. Acceptable. He thinks of the photographs he saw that morning. Blackened turrets, hatches fused shut, a loader's boot lying alone in a field. He reaches for a pencil. Not to calculate, to sketch. At the Detroit Arsenal tank plant, the assembly line never stops. Steel plates slam into position. Rivets hammer home. Engines are lowered into hulls with the precision of choreography. Thousands of Shermans will leave this place. Thousands. Johnson stands on the factory floor with a hard hat too big for his narrow shoulders, watching as ammunition racks are bolted into place along the interior walls of a hull. Shells stacked upright, Exposed. Ready. A foreman beside him shrugs. That's how the spec says to build it. Johnson does not argue. He asks questions. How long does it take to relocate the racks? How much volume is there beneath the turret basket? What happens if you isolate the propellant from open air? What if the shells were surrounded by something else? What like armor? The foreman asks skeptically. Johnson shakes his head. Not armor, something that absorbs heat. They look at each other. The machines thunder around them. What? The foreman says slowly, like water. Johnson does not answer immediately, but his pencil is already moving. Weeks later, he is standing over a test hull in a proving yard, watching technicians prepare a live fire trial. This is not how things are supposed to happen. Engineers do not redesign frontline combat vehicles without layers of approval. Mechanics do not propose structural changes to a tank already in mass production. Farm boys do not quietly challenge the doctrine of the United States Army Ordnance Department. But Johnson has done the work anyway. He has moved the ammunition lower, deeper into the hull, surrounded the storage compartments with water-filled jackets, redesigned the internal layout so a penetrating round does not immediately meet exposed propellant. The technicians think it will fail. The officers observing from behind the berm assume it will change nothing. The German 75 gun is loaded. The firing officer raises his hand. The yard falls silent. And as the order is given, and the round leaves the barrel, and the modified Sherman waits to receive the same death that has claimed so many before it, no one there realizes they are about to witness a moment that could change how thousands of men will live or die inside steel. The impact is coming, and this time something is going to be different. Section 2. The test that should have failed. The round strikes with a metallic crack that echoes across the proving ground. A tongue of flame jets briefly from the impact point, then disappears. For a split second, everyone expects the familiar sequence: penetration, internal ignition, the delayed, inevitable fireball. They have seen it dozens of times before, a ritual of destruction. But nothing happens. No plume of smoke. No rolling thunder from inside the hull. No turret popping upward like a lid from a boiling pot. Just silence. One of the technicians lowers his binoculars slowly. Another leans forward, as if closer distance might make sense of what he is seeing. The tank sits there, scarred but intact, the modified interior having swallowed the violence that should have killed it. Clarence Johnson does not celebrate. He steps closer instead, boots crunching across gravel, eyes locked on the entry point. They cut the power to the test gun. A signal is given. A crew approaches the Sherman cautiously, as though it might still decide to erupt. A hatch creaks open. Inside, the air is acrid but survivable. Blackened, yes. Scarred, yes. But the ammunition compartments are intact. The shells did not cook off. The water jackets did exactly what Johnson hoped they would do. They absorbed the heat. They slowed the ignition. They bought time. Not invincibility, but time. And in a burning tank, time is life. An officer standing near the berm clears his throat. "Run it again," he says. They do. A second round, another impact, more damage, more stress. Still no catastrophic fire. Whispers begin to move through the observers. Not excitement yet, something closer to discomfort. Because if this works, truly works, then it means something else too. It means that the way they have been building Shermans has been wrong. Bureaucracies do not like being proven wrong by quiet men. Johnson submits his data anyway. Charts, photographs, burn patterns, comparative survival windows. He does not use emotional language. He does not need to. The numbers speak clearly. Modified internal layout increases crew survival probability by measurable margins. Wet stowage significantly reduces ammunition ignition. Relocation of racks decreases catastrophic penetration effects. The response is slow. Committees meet, reports circulate, memos are stamped and restamped. Somewhere in Washington, a colonel frowns at the paperwork and wonders how much it would cost to retool factories already operating at full capacity. The war does not pause for discussions. In Normandy, tanks are still burning. But something is shifting. A few officers at Ardennes begin pushing quietly. Field commanders who have seen too many burned-out hulls begin asking questions. Production managers start running their own numbers. And slowly, reluctantly, the change begins. Late production M4 Shermans roll off the line with revised ammunition storage, deeper placement, surrounded by water jackets, subtle differences, invisible to most. But inside, the tank is no longer a tinderbox. Inside, a crew now has a fighting chance. August 1944, outside Falaise. Sergeant Tom Weaver grips the turret ring of his Sherman as the column inches forward. The air stinks of cordite and crushed vegetation. The Germans are retreating, but retreating Germans are still deadly. Weaver has heard the stories. Everyone has. The Ronson, the death trap, the jokes that are not really jokes. But his tank is different. He does not know the engineer's name. He does not know about Detroit or proving grounds or pencil sketches on stained clipboards. He only knows that the interior layout looks slightly odd compared to the older tanks he trained in. Ammunition stored lower, compartments sealed. Everything feels tighter, more deliberate. Contact left, the gunner shouts. Weaver barely has time to process it before the world detonates. The impact hammers through the hull with the violence of a sledgehammer from God. The Sherman jerks. The engine chokes. Inside, sparks erupt. Dust pours down from the ceiling. The smell of hot metal fills the compartment. For a frozen heartbeat, no one moves. This is the moment, the one every tanker fears, the pause between hit and death. Weaver waits for the fire. It does not come. Instead, there is coughing, shouting, pain, confusion, but no inferno, no consuming wall of flame, no instant cremation. "Driver, you alive?" Weaver shouts. A groggy voice answers, Yeah, I'm here." The gunner swears. The loader laughs once, sharp and disbelieving. "We should be dead." Weaver knows it too. They should be. But they are not. They bail out seconds later, scrambling into the ditch as German fire rips overhead. The tank is wounded, disabled, but not a funeral pyre. Smoke drifts lazily from the entry hole instead of roaring skyward. From across the field, an infantryman stares in confusion. He saw the hit, he saw the angle, he expected the usual fireball. Instead, he sees men climbing out. Alive. Back in Detroit, Johnson reads a short field report that arrives folded among dozens of others. No name, no headline, just a simple line buried in operational feedback. Crews survived penetration. No internal fire. Tank design may have prevented loss of life. He holds the paper between two gray-stained fingers for a long moment. This is why. Not the recognition, not the credit, not the promotion he will never receive. This. Somewhere across the ocean, a man is breathing tonight who should not be. A mother will receive a letter instead of a telegram. A child will still have a father. Johnson folds the report, and places it carefully into a drawer. Then he pulls out his notebook again. Because the war is not over. Because survival is not perfection. Because improvement never ends. And because even now the Germans are introducing new weapons, heavier guns, deadlier rounds, Panthers, Tigers, 88s. The Sherman has been given a second chance. But the enemy is about to raise the stakes once again. Section 3. The enemy raises the stakes. September 19, 1944, 08:17 hours, near Aachen, Germany. The fog hangs low, clinging to the shattered trees like a final act of mercy. Lieutenant Harold Brenner peers through his periscope, breath shallow, one hand resting on the cold steel of the turret wall. His Sherman idles in a ruined orchard, engine ticking softly. Somewhere ahead, a German Panther is waiting. They know it's there. The infantry knows it. Everyone knows it. They just don't know exactly where. Slow advance, Brenner murmurs into the throat mic. The tank creeps forward. The Panther fires first. The impact is unlike anything Brenner has felt before. Not a crack, not a punch, but a thunderous structural violence that seems to pass through the entire hull. The turret rings vibrate. The lights flicker. Someone yells. Hit, hit. The shell does not penetrate fully, but the force alone is terrifying. The Panther's 75 long-barreled gun is not like the earlier German weapons. It is precise. It is patient. It is built to kill tanks that thought they were safer now. Brenner swallows. His mouth tastes like copper. Driver, reverse, reverse. They fall back behind a stone wall as another round smashes into the earth where they stood seconds earlier. The crew breathes hard, alive again. But this time there is no relief, only the cold understanding that the enemy has evolved too. Across Europe, German armored doctrine is shifting. Panthers replace Panzer IVs. Tigers appear where no one expects them. The 88 gun, once feared as anti-aircraft artillery, now stalks roads and fields with merciless intent. Shermans are surviving more hits than before. Crews are escaping where they once burned. But the battlefield is changing faster than any factory can keep up with. And somewhere in Detroit, Clarence Johnson studies photographs of destroyed tanks once again. Not because his changes failed, but because the enemy adapted. The images on Johnson's desk are different now. Not the charred interiors, not the melted racks, not the familiar signature of catastrophic cook-off. Those have become rarer in the newer models. His changes worked. Instead, he sees something else. Turrets blown clean off, hulls ruptured like tin cans, entire tanks destroyed by sheer kinetic force rather than internal fire. He taps one photo with his pencil. Tiger I-88 impact, direct hit to the turret ring. Even the best internal layout cannot save a crew from that. Johnson leans back in his chair and closes his eyes. This is the part no one talks about in factories. The quiet realization that engineering is a race you can never fully win. You improve. The enemy counters. You adapt. They escalate. He hears the words of a production supervisor from weeks earlier. We can't redesign the whole tank every time the Germans build a new gun. Johnson had not replied then. He writes the sentence now instead, slowly, deliberately, on a blank page of his notebook. Then what is the alternative? October 1944, Fort Knox, Kentucky. A demonstration field stretches beneath gray skis. Observers stand in small clusters. Officers, engineers, representatives from Ordnance, a few men from Washington. Johnson stands off to the side, hands in his coat pockets, watching another modified Sherman roll into position. This one is different. Not a new tank, a concept tank. Extra armor plates welded at angles, experimental spall liners added inside the turret, reinforced stowage, redesigned escape routes, even small changes to hatch mechanisms so jammed steel can be forced open faster. It looks ugly. It looks improvised. It looks like something built by someone who cares more about survival than aesthetics. The test begins. Not against Panther fire, not against an 88, but against controlled impacts, stress points, simulated penetrations. They are testing margins now, seconds gained, degrees deflected, tiny advantages. Afterward, an officer approaches Johnson. "This isn't standardization," the man says flatly. "This is customization." Johnson meets his gaze. "This is survival." The officer hesitates. Then, "You understand we can't rebuild the fleet." "I understand," Johnson says, "but we can change how we build the next one." The officer studies the tank again, the awkward angles, the added plating, the modifications that would make accountants wince. "How many lives?" he asks quietly. Johnson does not exaggerate. He never does. "More than 0, he says. "Less than we lose now." That is enough. Winter 1944, Ardennes forest. Snow falls thick and heavy, muffling the distant thunder of artillery. American tanks sit hidden among trees, engines off, crews bundled inside steel hulls that creak with cold. Private First Class Daniel Ruiz huddles against the turret wall of his Sherman, hands tucked beneath his armpits for warmth. He listens to the radio crackle with fragmented reports. German offensive, massive, unexpected. Panzer divisions moving through the fog. The Battle of the Bulge has begun. They were told the front was quiet here. They were told this sector was safe. Now the woods are full of engines. Ruiz thinks about the tank, about how strange it is to trust your life to welded steel and design decisions made by men you will never meet. He thinks about the stories he heard during training. Older sergeants talking about how the Shermans used to burn, how crews used to die inside before they could even unclip their harnesses. "This one's better," his gunner had said once, tapping the interior wall. "Not perfect, but better." Outside, the first German shell whistles overhead. Ruiz closes his eyes. Somewhere far away, a farm boy-turned-engineer is asleep at his desk, pencil fallen from his hand, notebook open beside him. He does not know Ruiz exists. Ruiz does not know Johnson exists. But the distance between them is thinner than steel. And in the hours to come, in the chaos and fire and frozen terror of the Ardennes, that invisible connection is about to be tested in ways neither of them can imagine. Section 4. The Lives That Never Knew His Name. December 21st, 1944, 02:13 hours, Ardennes Forest. The night is alive with distant thunder. Not the kind that rolls across open sky. This thunder is sharper, mechanical, repeating, tank guns firing in the dark. Inside his Sherman, Daniel Ruiz grips the strap above his head as the hull vibrates. Snowmelt drips steadily from the ceiling. Condensation freezes in thin veins along the interior steel. Outside, something heavy is moving. You can tell by the sound, not fast like infantry, not frantic like trucks. This is slow, confident, predatory. A German tank. "Engine off," the lieutenant whispers. "No movement." The crew obeys instantly. The engine dies. The sudden silence is worse than the noise. Every man holds still, as if motion itself might betray them. Ruiz presses his ear against the cold armor. Through the steel he feels it, a low tremor, a distant growl, a machine weighing 50 tons moving through trees as though they were suggestions. A panther or a tiger, it doesn't matter. Both can kill them. The German tank pauses somewhere beyond the tree line. Then, without warning, it fires. The shell tears through another Sherman in the platoon like a fist through wet paper. A flash lights the forest. For a fraction of a second, every branch, every snowbank, every terrified face is illuminated in stark white. Ruiz flinches instinctively, waiting for the secondary explosion. The towering fireball, the scream of cooking ammunition. It never comes. The hit tank burns, but it does not erupt. The turret stays in place. The fire stays contained. Men scramble out of hatches, stumbling, alive. The sight is so unexpected it momentarily breaks the rhythm of combat. "You seeing this?" someone whispers. "Yeah," another voice answers. "Yeah, I'm seeing it." The surviving crew vanish into the trees. The burning tank becomes just another wreck, not a tomb. The German tank does not linger. It moves on, searching for more prey. Inside Ruiz's Sherman, no one speaks for a long moment. Finally, the gunner exhales a long, shaking breath. "That would have been us last year." No one argues. They all know it. Back in Detroit, winter light slants weakly through high factory windows. Clarence Johnson stands beside a supervisor, watching rows of Shermans crawl along the production line like steel animals. He sees the changes now everywhere. Ammunition stowage moved lower. Water jackets sealed into place. Internal compartments shaped for survivability, not convenience. Small modifications that most workers install without ever knowing why. They just know it's different than before. The supervisor checks his clipboard. "We're producing 3,000 a month now with the revised layout." Johnson nods. 3,000. 3,000 tanks. 12,000 crew positions. 12,000 men who now have better odds than the ones before them. The supervisor glances sideways at him. "You ever think about what you've done?" Johnson doesn't answer right away. What he has done. He thinks of burned steel, of test impacts, of reports quietly filed, of resistance from men who did not want to admit mistakes, of long nights hunched over drawings while the radio murmured casualty numbers in the background. "I think about what still needs fixing," he says finally. The supervisor studies him for a moment, then shakes his head softly. "You're an odd one, Clarence." Johnson almost smiles. January 1945, somewhere in Alsace. Captain Robert Hale stands beside his disabled Sherman, hands on hips, watching smoke curl lazily from the engine deck. The tank will never move again. A direct hit shattered the drivetrain. The transmission is gone. The hull is warped. But the crew stands beside him. "Not burned, not broken, alive." "Hell of a thing," the loader mutters. "Tank dead, but we ain't." Hale nods. "That's the point." They walk away from the wreck together, boots crunching in snow, leaving behind a machine that failed its mission but succeeded in something far more important: keeping them breathing. None of them know why this Sherman behaved differently. None of them know that the ammunition was moved by a few inches, that water jackets absorbed heat they never saw, that internal partitions slowed flames they never felt. They only know the result. They are alive. And across Europe, thousands more like them are walking away from wrecks that once would have been coffins. The war grinds toward its end. Cities fall, lines collapse, borders dissolve. The machinery of destruction slows, not from mercy but from exhaustion. In May 1945, Germany surrenders. Factories begin shifting back towards civilian production. Clipboards change. Contracts expire. The frantic urgency of wartime engineering gives way to peacetime bureaucracy. Johnson packs his notebook into a drawer. No ceremony, no commendation, no headline. There is no ticker tape parade for men who moved ammunition racks. He returns home, returns to quieter work, returns to a life where the most urgent mechanical problem is once again something ordinary, a broken pump, a misaligned shaft, a stubborn engine. Years pass. The Sherman becomes a museum piece, a relic. Tourists walk around preserved hulls, reading placards that list caliber, speed, armor thickness. Children climb on the tracks. Parents take photographs. Very few of them ever read about wet stowage. Very few ever hear the name Clarence Johnson. Almost none ever consider that the difference between a dead crew and a living one came down to someone who refused to accept acceptable losses. History remembers generals. History remembers battles. History remembers explosions. History rarely remembers the man who changed the angle of a bracket. But the men who walked out of burning fields, the men who went home, the families who received letters instead of telegrams, they remember something, even if they never knew his name. And in the end, that may be the most powerful legacy of all. Because the true measure of impact is not fame. It is survival. And the quiet knowledge that, when steel met fire, someone somewhere had cared enough to make it harder to die. Section 5. The Quiet Aftermath. June 3, 1967, 14:26 hours, a small museum in Ohio. Sunlight filters through dusty windows, catching in the grooves of an old Sherman tank parked silently on the polished floor. Its olive drab paint has faded to something softer now, almost gentle. A placard stands beside it, neat and factual. M4A3 Sherman tank. Weight 33 tons. Armament 75 gun. Crew 5. That is all most visitors will read. A school group wanders past, sneakers squeaking. A teacher points at the turret and recites memorized lines about D-Day and Normandy. A boy asks how fast it could go. A girl asks if it really fought in battle. The teacher nods but cannot say where or who survived or who did not. Across the room, Clarence Johnson stands alone. He is older now, his back slightly bent, his hair thin and colorless. His hands, once strong and precise, now carry the subtle tremor of time. He wears no uniform, no medals, nothing that marks him as someone who mattered here. He watches the children climb onto the tracks when the teacher isn't looking. He watches a father lift his son into the turret hatch so the boy can peer inside. The boy laughs. It's small in here. Johnson almost says something. Almost tells him that yes, it was small and loud and hot and terrifying. That 5 men once sat inside spaces like this with death only inches away on all sides. That sometimes the difference between burning and breathing came down to where a box of shells had been bolted. He almost says something, but he doesn't, because no one is asking. He walks closer instead, runs his fingertips lightly along the side of the hull, feels the cool steel, the weld lines, the faint imperfections in the surface. He recognizes the layout instantly, the deeper stowage, the internal configuration only someone who had drawn it would ever truly notice. It is one of his. Not officially. There is no label that says so, but he knows, and that is enough. Behind him, 2 elderly men stand whispering near the display, veterans by the posture alone. One of them gestures toward the tank. Lost 3 friends in the old ones, the man says quietly. But when they brought in the newer models, it was different, still dangerous, always dangerous. But we started seeing guys walk away from hits that should have killed them. The other nods. Yeah, like somebody somewhere finally gave a damn. Johnson closes his eyes for a moment. Somebody somewhere. He turns away before they can see his face. There are no history books written about Clarence Johnson. No dramatic biographies. No documentaries narrated in somber tones. His name does not appear beside Eisenhower's or Patton's or Rommel's. He is not quoted in speeches. His work is not summarized in bold paragraphs. But his influence spreads in quieter ways. In after-action reports where survival rates improve. In engineering doctrines that begin to prioritize crew survivability. In tank designs that evolve, decade by decade, to separate ammunition from men. In armored vehicles that are no longer designed only to fight, but to protect. The lessons of his work ripple outward. Future engineers study catastrophic failures not as acceptable costs, but as design problems waiting for solutions. Militaries begin to measure success not only by victory, but by how many come home. And somewhere, deep inside every armored vehicle designed after the Sherman, there is an unspoken assumption. A tank should not just be lethal. A tank should keep its crew alive. That idea did not come from a general. It did not come from doctrine. It did not come from a battlefield. It came from a quiet man with a pencil, a clipboard, and the stubborn refusal to accept that burning alive was acceptable. The camera lingers on the Sherman in the museum. Still silent, immobile. A relic of a brutal time. But if you listen carefully, if you imagine the echoes trapped inside its steel, you can almost hear it. Not the roar of the engine, not the thunder of the gun, but the voices. Men shouting orders. Men laughing in tense moments of relief. Men breathing alive after a hit that should have ended them. Those sounds never made it into official records. They never appear in statistics. But they existed because someone changed where the ammunition sat. Because someone added water where fire once ruled. Because someone believed that even in war, human lives were worth